Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us. First of all, tell us about these fantastic 4 animals, first of all.
Well, it's two very different cases, but they're connected by the same issue, which is humans exploiting wild animals. The 2 cheetah cubs in Ethiopia were very, very young, very, very vulnerable, and had been confiscated by regional authorities, probably on their way to a very uncertain future as exotic pets, possibly in the Middle East, having been caught from the wild. And we were lucky enough that we operate a sanctuary just outside of Addis Ababa, and our team undertook a very risky and uncertain journey to take these cubs from where they'd been held for some time, and we can now give them what approaches proper care, the best we can do under the circumstances. They won't go back to the wild, because in many cases the damage has already been done, but they'll live in our care for the rest of their lives. And the zoo in Bloemfontein has had a number of issues for a number of years, and reached a bit of a crisis point. And an excellent coalition was formed of animal welfare groups led by Bloemfontein SPCA, and they called on groups like Born Free, and we were able to offer space for these 2 leopards who are going to live out their lives at our big cat sanctuary at Shamwari Private Game Reserve.
During this period where so many countries are under lockdown, does it mean that our animals are more or less protected? I'm thinking that perhaps it is restricting the activity of illegal traders as well, or not?
Well, it's very difficult to say. I think there's enough evidence to suggest that people are still undertaking illegal activities regardless of lockdown, wherever they are in the world. And in some ways, lockdown is causing our enforcement activities and our police and our wildlife agencies to be on a restricted basis. So there may be an increased opportunity for more illegality relating to wild animals.
This morning we got some information from the South African police. They've arrested 3 people in Mpumalanga. They were in possession of 6 rhino horn. Which is the illegal trade that you're most concerned about? Is it rhino or is it pangolin? We spoke to the people from Pangolin Africa earlier, and they too are very concerned about what's going to happen. And it is so important, of course, to keep an eye on this trade, because it can spread viruses as well.
Completely. I mean, it's difficult to suggest that there's one that's more significant than the other. I think if you look across the range of very, very vulnerable species that are being exploited for this disgusting trade, they all have enormous effect. They're all being subjected to enormous effects by the illegal demand for wildlife products. And of course, there are these corollaries with things like emergence of new zoonotic diseases coming out that we need to really consider. And I think there needs to be a big global push to properly fund and enforce law enforcement on these sorts of activities to stamp it out once and for all. So stopping the markets where some of these products are traded, trying to stem the demand, better enforcement of wildlife populations, and of course looking after individual animals, because at the end of the day, that's very often what's happening, is that individual animals are suffering as part of this awful trade as well.
And apart from the awful suffering of these poor animals, it is important that we get a hold on what's happening, because we want to clamp down on the spread of the disease. And the problem is money, because we're seeing, certainly in South Africa, national budgets, we are reallocating money to gear up our health system for a looming pandemic. Is that reallocation of budget something that could negatively impact animal conservation, rather?
Well, in the long term, there's going to be a lot of belt tightening across the board, no matter what aspect of life we're talking about. But I guess what I would be suggesting is that when we're looking at this, we need to recalibrate where wildlife conservation sits in our list of priorities. It needs to not be an afterthought. It needs to be front and centre in international legislation and in national policy, that it's not something that we do just because it's a nice thing to do. It's integral and critical to the survival of humanity and its future functioning.
Yeah, and also we depend on animals. Most pandemics start with wildlife, which then moves to livestock, and then it jumps to humans. Is that right?
There's certainly a lot of examples of this becoming a bigger feature of life, and it's very possible that another similar case could evolve in the future, like this COVID disease has probably come from wild animals. There's any number of possibilities of something similar happening in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Chris Draper, Head of Animal Welfare and Captivity at the Born Free Foundation. And some good news, those cheetahs were rescued. So that is some good work being done despite difficult times.